Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to We'll Fix It team. You guys are awesome. I really appreciate all the new subscribers. That was really kind of you guys to come over here, jump in and give me a sub and you take time to do that. That's really awesome. And just like I say, it'll help us later on in the long run. So thank you guys so much. They have taken this channel and put it on the no search list. So you guys actually doing the hard work on clicking those links is just great, guys. So anyhow, let's get to a fun video. I call it fun. Cut my teeth on these things, by the way. So when I'm middle-aged, I'm 41, so I'm kind of still in the crew of the young, but doing this since I was real, oh my gosh, in my teens, I was messing with what they call carburetors. And we're going to look at a vintage line of GM carburetors, kind of from the early years up to the later years. And then we've got some Ford carburetors that are quite interesting. And one little Chrysler carburetor that was related to, it's a late model version of the teapot. So with no further ado, let's flip the camera around. Oh, there they are. See those? Okay. I've laid these out, not quite in chronological order. This is a Quadrajet. While we're talking, we'll get it kind of laid out. This is great production, guys. I'm prepared for this. And I'm just going to go in line of what I do believe to be the correct gears as we kind of went up. Let me get this laid out, guys. Here we are. And I'd have to say that get the Ford carburetors lined up. These are fun. This is fun stuff, guys. I love the way that they were trying to overcome engine vacuum, fuel atomization, fuel vapor lock, all that fun stuff. So so let's not waste any time here. What we have here, this is these Quadrajet carburetors, I believe, started around 68, and this came off of a 68 Cadillac. I remember taking this off. A man wanted to soup it up or you know, put aftermarket performance stuff on it. It was a really nice car, and that's what he wanted, and I didn't want the old stuff. I said, okay, so I've kept this carburetor, and it was working. Of course, it may need a kit now, but kit as in rebuild kit. And this here is a Quadrajet from getting into maybe still in the 60s, but a little later on up. This one has you can see a front line feed, large filter. This had a sideline feed, small filter. And this would have had an element, paper element. These would have had a rock, well, I call it a rock element, but what is this? It was a cast brass filter. In other words, it was cast real porous, and fuel would filter through the casting of the brass, almost like you would see, kind of like in a fish tank aquarium when you put the air hose to it. That material is not rock, but it looks kind of like it's porous enough where air can get through it, and they cast it out of brass. And so this had a long one. This would have had a small paper filter. This is getting, do believe, a Pontiac, and Pontiac is in like probably a 72, 3 or 4 Pontiac Oldsmobile, because of this. You got to remember, guys, so fuel vapor was a problem so far as the carburetors doing this. Just a couple ways you can vapor lock, but one of them would be fuel would fume out of the fuel bowl. We'll flip quick here. That with the way that it's set up is what I'll do is, because I'll be able to, I can kind of show you. That way I can be in the frame too. We can sort of be together, and I'll explain a little bit about heat soak on carburetors right quick here, and get it right. So what you would have here would be a port right here at the top, and then you'd have a this older carburetor, before they had emissions, there's actually small little vent holes here drilled into it. We'll go right there and you'll see that here. And then same thing right here. And then they started, you know, really wanting to kind of clamp down on that issue, and we'll talk about that in here in a second. But what I'm getting at is they wanted to vent the fuel out from the air horn area where the air filter would be on, even though there was this vent hose as well. They relied a lot of it to come out right here. That would keep the thing, it'd make it easy starts after the vehicle is warmed up, and you shut it off and it heat soak and the fuel and vapor, and it would overflow the motor with fuel fumes and kind of flood for a second. And on this one here, same thing, but it's frontline feed. And I'm going to tell you a little something about the Quadrajets and why I like them so much. The older ones, I've kept these for reasons, dude. These are cool old carburetors. Really great throttle response. When put together right, this flapper back here for the secondaries, which is operating metering rods that regulate fuel. This one here, something's wrong with it. It's not moving very freely. You can see right there how that works. This one here has got, these springs would break, but I've got plenty of these parts to fix this. So I've kept all these stuff. With this Oldsmobile, getting back to some of the fuel fumes, you can see that the bowl vent was right here and had a large bowl vent, and you don't even see it going into the air horn area. You notice that right there? It's pretty much, it minimalizes as much fuel fumes to heat, even though you still get it to come out, because if you take this top plate off, you'll see that these metering rods access part of that, and you get some fumes out of that, but you'll minimize a lot of it by it all coming out of this one spot. And here is a 2-barrel Rochester carburetor. I would say circa in the same year of the mid-70s. And then right here, we're getting into the 80s now, guys. 79, 80, 81, 2, and 3. This is a Rochester dual jet. This is called a Rochester 2-jet. And the Rochester dual jet, if you'll notice, it carries a lot of similarities that the Quadrajet has. Check this out, by the way, guys. You'll notice the spread bore design on the carburetor of the Quadrajet. And what was cool about these is it provided great drivability on the highway with a great vacuum signal. And you would get great throttle response, not to mention just the way that they did throttle linkage and the way that the ratio was as far as your actuation on throttle. You know, they really got pretty tight down in the 80s. They really cinched down that where, you know, just a little bit of movement gave you a lot on the throttle. But even these were considered a mechanical secondary, and there's a couple ways these things operate. You see how you know, they'll open up without having any vacuum on them. So to make this design work and work effectively, you basically had these flapper plates that I was just kind of fooling with. You'll see that this one works really well. So as you operated this and you opened these front venturis all the way up, the engine would start climbing through its RPM range. Now, even though on the bottom these are open, technically you're not really pulling any air by any of these little nozzles right here at all, because this plate's kind of got you closed off. That keeps the vacuum around focused on your smaller venturis until the RPM range gets to the point where no more air can make it through these venturis because of the size of it and the amount of space that air takes up in its velocity. So next thing you know, you'll start creeping these things open right here. Air starts bleeding by these, and then on the whole time, it's actually providing a great source of vacuum just to pull fuel directly out of the back of that bowl. It's great. Great on their stock. I'd say 300 horsepower or less, you know, 350 horsepower if you've got a good fuel pump, pumping. But if not, if you're just running on the regular mechanical pump, 300 horses is probably about what you're going to use these for. Being the fact that, well, you would get a good burst, but after a while, the bowls are really small. They're in the center of this carburetor. They get really bad about heat soaking. And that was the, you know, there's a conspiracy that goes around. They said that GM got in touch with fuel makers to change some of the fuel content so that fuel wouldn't vapor as much, and so that made these carburetors work better because they had so much invested in Rochester, and because it was a spin-off company, and in the contract with these carburetors, that it would have really messed them up. So once again, would you call that another government motors? Excuse me, Patriot, government motors. Yeah, bailout, maybe, probably. Anyways, so by the way, I don't know anything about any of that stuff. We don't talk about that on this channel. Getting to more of what we're getting on this here. So we've got a bowl that's heat soaked, so they're trying everything to make that works. These work really well, and I actually like these carburetors because of that drivability. And when you throttle into these things, they're real snappy. Now, you can work with these, and you can make things happen so far as getting more power out of them, but there's a lot to do. Now, these things also are real wonky about, there's other things, little quirks, people that are triggered by these carburetors, I guess you would say. When you take this bottom plate off, you'll see the actual well holes drilled for these metering rods right here. When you pull these metering rods out, you'll see these holes go down, and they're ported into the sections of the carburetor to get the gas to flow in certain directions. And there's so many people that have said so many things. Let me get around here. I want to show you guys something. I don't know. I've actually watched a few other videos on people to talk about carburetors, just because I kind of just want to get the feel of what's going on in the world. But I've been in this garage for a long time, and I got to be as experienced with an old school mechanic guy who worked on these things with his dad. And you can actually buy, and you can still find these, but let me see if I can get it in frame. You see these right here, guys? These little sponges you put them in when you've got the carburetor apart in that well area where they leak down, and that seals them up, and it's a permanent fix. It does, this is gas reactive, so it sticks to it. It swells into the hole so that it actually can't, just nothing goes past it. This is made by Mountain Man, or carried by Mountain Man, and there's a matter of fact, if you'd like, I can show you in case they are getting hard to find, guys. So let me flip the camera around, and I'll do a little bit of PR for this guy. Now, I got this stuff from him. I've had these for several years because you just don't work on these carburetors as much as you used to. But this guy here is where I found these, and I did some research, and I found them on eBay and stuff, so you can look around. But these little sponges, that work so well with these Quadrajets. And hopefully soon when I'll be using one of these carburetors, I'll do a video on building these, because I know these like the back of my hand. I can have people bring these to me in boxes and pieces, and I can put them back together, and they work so good. Now, I don't have an 80s model Quadrajet, because I would love to show you guys, but this 2-jet is going to be a really good example of what the Quadrajet would have been like in 1985 or 84. Okay. I had an 81 Chevrolet El Camino with a 3.8 liter Chevrolet V6, and I had this carburetor on it. Not this one particular, but this make of carburetor, which is a Rochester dual jet, meaning this is a Quadrajet because it's got 4 Venturis, 4 sets of jets to operate those 4 Venturis. This has 2 Venturis and 2 sets of jets to make, so a dual jet. So they tried hard on their names, I know, guys. But you're going to notice something kind of funny that you're not, you see this right here is part of an electronic metering rod that is operated by an old early ECM. I don't forget what they called it. GM had a name for it, but it was an ECM pretty much, an engine control module. And it took input from your throttle position sensor. And if anybody's had a GM product in the 80s with a carburetor, you would have seen, for some reason, an oxygen sensor. And there would have been a map sensor as well. You could actually look on the firewall and you'd see a map sensor hooked up. And so your throttle position sensor, of course, this one, somebody's handled this kind of rough and has broken it. I'm going to up there and get that top off. But anyhow, we can see if this top will come off. Here, well, there's part of it right there. It's missing the rod. There was a rod that would have went in this top cover right here that would have met up to this little TPS sensor, and it actually worked off the accelerator pump. So when you move the throttle right here, this lever, there would be a rocker arm right here. It would push down on this accelerator pump, and it would read off the tip of that, and it would give the computer a signal for its throttle position. Now check this out, dude. This is how they were trying to go in the 80s. They were like, we're going to make this carburetor work efficiently one way or another. You'll notice this plug-in is hooked to a little, I can't get it out right now, but there's a magnetic little solenoid down in that there's a rod that would have went right here. Parts have been borrowed out of this thing. This rod would have went down, and it would have touched this metering rod here and the other metering rod that's kind of stuck down right now. The spring's gone off of it. Yeah, the spring's gone. But anyhow, it would have pushed down on these. When you push down on these, it changes the fuel and air ratio, and instead of relying on vacuum signal from, if you were to take these top plates off, you would have seen vacuum signal ports that kind of port through the gasket that would have operated the same metering rods that are in here, but it would be under vacuum, not under this electronic control. Which meaning, I guess it figured it could process what you were putting into it better than it could read the vacuum signal. Which, in a sense, they were really trying to head to a certain direction, guys. A lot of similarities. Center hung fuel bowl. The 2 front Venturis look just like the ones off of a Quadrajet. So they were actually sort of probably utilizing a cast they already had, and just made the best of it. And I don't blame them for that. This was a real earlier 2-jet. I'm sorry, 2-jet, dual jet, 2-jet, GM product. And you've seen these on 305s, 350s. all kind of, I seen one on a Pontiac 400. I mean, a little bitty carburetor sitting up there. But anyhow, this was a real basic carburetor. Accelerator pump, just like anything else, lever operated. It was neat. It pushed it. You had real fuel accelerator pump, not like some of the teapots, which I got an predecessor to that over there, Chrysler product. But this carburetor was what you would have been a state of the art. You had an air bleed mixture screw that worked part of the vacuum system by this right here that you adjusted from up here. You could take this plate out here and do that. But anyhow, it worked like a two-stroke. It was weird how they done that. Now, moving on to some of the Ford carburetors. This is a Holley 2100 or 2050, 2150. Forgive me for not being so up and up on all that. I've been through a million of these carburetors. I got them all on my old trucks, guys, and I think they're probably the best bang for the buck, because you can't get any simpler as far as a carburetor is concerned, as far as its ability to do what it needed to do in simple form with very simple tools, not having to, you could really work on those. So this top plate comes off. You've got access to the float. You have the needle valve over here. You've got two mixture jets. You've got accelerator pump on the front, and on the bottom right here, which baffles people to death, is there's a thing called a power valve. Now, they don't use a power valve on a Quadrajet. They don't. They're more reliant on vacuum signal and stuff, which I guess it brings a little fuel efficiency, but to me, I think this power valve really makes a difference so far as getting some fuel pumping, when you're having a low vacuum situation. These little carburetors here run like a scalded dog. You could take one of these little two-barrel carburetors, and in certain years, you'd find them in 500 CFM models that went on some of the bigger motors, and rejet these and make really good carburetors. I mean, just, if you ask me, they were just sort of like the Holley carburetors, the good Holley carburetors, cousin, the smart cousin. The couple of the things that people were triggered on about these was the fact that people would over tighten these corner bolts, or corner bolts, I guess, because they're not screws, but look like screws. But anyway, they'd over tighten these, and they would have problems with these sealing up. Easy fix with a flat file and a vise. You just run it across a flat file. You knock the high spot down where it was knurled in. You have operations on this Ford are real similar when you've got a choke pull-off. These Quadrajets have a choke pull-off as well, but it's not mounted on here because we've borrowed it. Here's one right here. That would allow the choke to kind of open up and allow the... and by the way, not to jump around too much, the Quadrajets had a setup between the choke over here, and it would allow the secondaries not to work till the engine was completely warmed up to keep you from, like, a backfire under the hood. The power valve on the bottom of these Motorcrafts would rupture if you had a spit back or a backfire through the throttle body or through the intake. It would be a power. If you starve for fuel or a cold start, and it would send a positive vacuum signal up through the system, far exceeding what would normally have been under the vacuum signal, and you would blow this little... If you take this thing off, there's a part that screws in. It has a membrane diaphragm, and it would blow that diaphragm out, and then it would still operate because it wouldn't be a big hole or anything. You'd still get vacuum signal, but you would get a fuel drain from the bowl, because if you take the top plate off, you look down in there, that power valve threads right into the bottom of the fuel bowl. It gets fuel in there, and it bellows underneath the vacuum signal that's inconsistent from an open throttle, low vacuum, and the valves opening and closing creates sort of a not a positive vacuum signal, and so that makes that little membrane underneath here, that power valve, flutter. And there's actually, when you take this off, you'd see two little holes that go to where that ports fuel right directly in here, and just pumps fuel up to these nodulars that's down in here, and gets the motors a little bit of fuel under low vacuum that normally wouldn't be getting, because of the low airflow, and the open throttle wouldn't allow a lot of airflow focused around these air horns in the Venturi. That was if you'll notice the size of these Venturis right here versus the size of these, this, you can see that they were really aimed at focusing the signal of vacuuming around just the jets itself, and not really relying on the power valve. These big open holes, you could lose some vacuum under a heavy load, low RPMs, and that power valve would get you going. But of course, it came at a little bit of a fuel economy cost. I think that they were a little bit worse on gas. There's a give and a take. Simplicity versus this right here. Of course, this would be in 4-barrel, but I think these things only moved about 550 to maybe, I think, 600 CFM. I'd have to look these up. So you would almost right at it. A lot of these were 350 CFM 2 barrels. Now, the carburetor that I think is really fascinating to me. Thank you for sticking it through the video, by the way. The carburetor that's really fascinating to me, guys, here, we'll look at me for a minute so we can, is this Motorcraft carburetor right here. It doesn't do very well when I do this. I know, thank you for this is a new channel we're starting up. We're going to do better productions as things go on, but we work on running the business during the day. It's hard to get all set up for that. I just would like to get information out, and I really thank all the new subscribers for checking this out. Let me flip this thing back around. This super awesome Motorcraft, to me, it just didn't take off, and it should have. You'll notice that you see this here. This Motorcraft is called a variable Venturi. You even see they coined the name variable Venturi. If anybody has any experience with motorcycles or ATVs, they'll know that you'll have a diaphragm over top of it's called a CV carburetor, constant velocity, and that diaphragm is reflective to vacuum. And the main deal, just like, say, for instance, these flappers at the back, with this closed off, it's going to keep vacuum, it's going to keep a negative pressure around these and pull fuel out of these jets. That was what its plan was. Let me flip this over, guys. This is so wild. It's got butterflies, and the Venturi is just like this one here, right? You notice that. But sitting over top of it, it's almost like it's a choke. That's what that is. I would call that a choke, except for the fact that there's several other things that are happening here. You'll notice the metering rods that are mounted. That helps to keep this thing lined up, but there's actually fuel ported to these, and they're tapered, and so that helps to set a fuel mixture. When you throttle into this right here, what ends up, you notice that they open up a little bit because there's a mechanical lever that's actually ported to help open these so that it goes to get you going. But before the motor makes a certain amount of vacuum, these will stay closed off. When the vacuum signal comes up more positive, it starts to open these and stay them. As the vacuum bellows, you'll watch these things flutter, just like on a single cylinder motor, if you see it on a motorcycle. But what's happening is just keeping a vacuum around the body of the carburetor where your jets are down here to only let us, to keep the fuel in there. And it happens really fast. If you're actually under the hood and you throttle one of these, this thing doesn't take long because the motor revs up, the vacuum comes really quick. But if you're under a heavy load at low RPMs and you throttle into it, instead of leaning out or relying on the power, this doesn't have, I don't think, no, so you don't see the power valve design. It's a little different there, guys. They even did a different port. Instead of having that, you have a more efficient way of monitoring the fuel with these constant velocity slides, I'd call them, sitting over top of that, just like a motorcycle. You have a butterfly in front of those slides there. And that was a really, really cool idea. But of course, we were facing a time when electronics and fuel injection were really starting to become a thing. And so these didn't get to take off. But this was, you know, as machining processes got better and ideas got better, this would have been a great thing to expand on later on. Honda, let me check, dude. Check this out, camera. So Honda, you think that that's crazy that Ford would have done that with CV carburetors, right? Variable Venturis. There is a Honda Prelude that was made for 2 years that had CV carburetors on it. And if you can remember, it was in around the mid to late 80s when that was done. And it were really an aggravating thing to work on because the way the air filter box was set up, it had 2 Solex constant velocity carburetors on it with the very same design of a CV where you had a butterfly in front of those actual vacuum actuators, and as that meter and rods hooked onto them. Motorcycles the same way. It provides great low end torque, constant vacuum signal at low RPMs when you're running a single cylinder engine, because you don't have a constant vacuum signal even up through the RPMs. It's constantly pulsing. So to keep things under wraps, you can actually use that design, and it keeps the fuel real monitored very well. Let's flip back over. Excuse me, guys. Now you want to talk about trying everything they could try. Here we are, guys. This is a Motorcraft Quadrajet, dude. You're not going to believe it. I don't know if you've ever seen one of these or not, but what you have here is a 4-barrel carburetor or a 4 Venturi carburetor. Real thermoquad looking. The fuel bowl is here in the front. It's got a front-mounted fuel bowl. They didn't have it center-mounted. That was the problem with these and vapor locks, was all the heat soak from the center location of the fuel bowl. Look at this. You see this little plate right here, of course, it's a little sticky because it's been sitting on the shelf. Very similar to right here. Look at that. You've got, let me see if I can get this to, a lot of these things have been sitting on the shelf, and so we'll flip it over, but you have, check this out, check this out. A Holley flanged Quadrajet. The flange is different. You can notice that. So it's a different flange altogether. You know, there's a different bolt pattern for that. But you'll notice the similarities of the spread bore design. The super small little Venturi is smaller than the ones on this 2-barrel right here. 2 Venturi. To these larger, very super large secondary Venturis that are the vacuum managed over your ports through these right here. You'd notice that these had vacuum ports running to this door to help open that door, and then that allowed vacuum to stay on your secondary jets. Crazy, ain't it? Ford did that. I can give you an idea when that was done. I would have to say, being that still got the original tag on it, this letter D would stand for 1970. If this was an E, it would be 1980. If it was an F, it would be 1990. They started that in 1950 with the letter B. So 1950 B, 1960 C, 1970 D. That's the year and the decade. If that was a D6, that would be a 76, but it's a D7, which makes it a 1977 model carburetor. So this was a mid-70s idea. I'm really not sure what motors that came on. I just know I just ended up with that carburetor through junk that was laying around, and I was fascinated by it, and it was completely stuck. None of the throttle things operated, and I've been soaking it in oil because I'm like, I just got to see if I can get it rolling. Here is a Chrysler antecessor to the teapot, very similar. Much like it's a lot of similarities to the actual Ford Motorcraft 2100, I guess you'd call it, or the 2150 or the 2250. Anyways, they have a shoebox design of this. They make a 4-barrel version of this carburetor, which looks like another one of these, is backed right up to it with the secondaries off of a vacuum operated flapper. Really cool. I've got to dig up one of those. We'll have to do a video on. But it's called a 4100 shoebox if you ever want to Google it. And it's a really fascinating carburetor, super simple and super effective. This just uses some pretty large Venturis considering the size of the carburetor. You've got a front mounted fuel bowl. Whenever the vehicle was sitting at an idle or sitting off, I don't know if you've noticed some of these little, right here, here's a good example. When this thing is sitting in idle mode, and you're not on the throttle, let's see, you're not on the throttle, this can come down, and this closes off so that you don't have fuel fumes vaporing while you're moving or on the throttle. But when you're off the throttle and you're idling, this would push down and let fuel vapor vent out of this instead of up here, give it a place to go. Same thing going on with this little flapper at the front. And this was your part for your secondaries right here. And you could adjust your secondary rate by bending this lever here or changing this hole selections for your accelerator pump. So yeah. Pretty cool stuff. This was, like I said, a Chrysler product. And I really was focusing on our Quadrajets because people are so triggered by these Quadrajets. And I was so fascinated by this Ford Quadrajet. And I've only seen this one time. This is it right here. I've never seen one of these carburetors before. And in the chats or in the comments, let me know what you think about it, guys. Thank you so much. I really do get this. I really, really, really do appreciate you guys for tuning in. What a wonderful opportunity it is for me to be able to bring information to you guys, kind of connect with people aside from other things that we talk about. I like getting on a personal level, which is, we love fixing things. And, you know, on this channel, I'll involve some of my family members and my daughter, my wife. She loves to go with me places, or I go with her too. We love to do things together, but she actually enjoys going and seeing the people that I hang around with, because it's a big family when you kind of are in I call it the junking world, where I don't haul stuff for junk, but I'm always in for oddity, as in, you know, vehicle, hot rod stuff. You get in with the community of guys who are really loyal and really hardworking, and they appreciate what you do, and we appreciate what they do. And so getting involved with that and being able to get out here and talk to you guys and shoot these videos and just bring people together, and in a positive way, where everybody gets to, this is a positive experience. You know, everybody, we want people to be happy and fun. That's right. So thank you so much for tuning in. Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of the day. And in the weeks coming up, whenever you see this video, I hope life is doing you well. Thank you very much, guys. Lots of love. God is definitely